In this video we're going to have a look at the terrain generation itself, how it's done, and the options we've got to change the look of the terrain in the game itself. Now if you've watched the biomes video, you will know that this biome map here represents the terrain in the game, and each pixel of the texture is one terrain chunk. Now a terrain chunk is made up of 16 meter by 16 meter chunk of terrain, and they are placed together one after another to create the endless terrain that we see in the game. The terrain is generated using the Marching Cubes algorithm. There's a lot of information about this on the internet, but one particularly good video is the one found here on Sebastian Larg's channel. So I recommend watching this video if you want to understand exactly how Marching Cubes works. Now back in Unity we've got our biome map stored on a 512 by 512 texture, with each pixel representing one chunk. Now each chunk is 16 meters, which means you've got just over 8,000 meters in each direction, giving you about 67,000 square meters of land to explore. And the texture maps in both directions, giving you endless scrolling of terrain. Now the red dot on the terrain here, there if I zoom in, marks a player's start position. Now this is stored here in the terrain manager script. The seed value here, this is a random seed value that is used for all random number generation throughout the whole of the project. So providing that number stays the same, then every time you start you will get exactly the same game world. Every piece of terrain will be the same, every tree position, rock position and so on will be exactly the same. Now underneath we got the maximum view distance. The maximum view distance is in meters, and that's how much of the terrain in each direction from the player that will be filled with chunks. So any chunks that exist further than 50 meters away with the setting we have now will be hidden. So with that setting you can actually see the chunks gradually come into view, so that would need to be a much higher setting for a finished game, but I've got it fairly low because every time I want to start the game it has to generate all the visible chunks, so it does speed things up in game starting if you have a smaller number here. Now the water level, if you have any water included in your game, that's a level in meters, that is the water level for the game. So if you have a terrain chunk that includes water, anything below 27 meters will be considered underwater, and the water plane will be drawn at 27 meters. Now you've got the option to include water or not include water with this checkbox. If you don't have water included, then you don't have to supply a water prefab, and any areas on the map that are shown as water will just be whatever the terrain material is, and no water prefab will be generated to go above it. Now the 3D noise settings, you've got the option to change the noise scale, the octaves, persistence and lacunarity. They are standard values for noise, and there's a lot of information on the internet about what they are and how they affect the noise. One particularly good article can be found here, so I suggest you have a read through that if you're interested in how the settings affect the noise that you're creating. But back in Unity we're just going to have a look at some of them and then run the game and see the differences that we see on the screen. So we'll start off by running the game without changing any of them, and then we can see the terrain as it is with the settings we've got at the moment. So here we are, and if we go over here we can see we're actually on the edge of a rather large cavern. If we jump down, got a little cave here. If we turn the back round, we've got quite a big cavern down here that we can run into. Right, let's exit that and then change some of the settings and see what the game looks like when we run it again. So if we start with the noise scale, if we were to make that a smaller number, so let's say 50, and then run the game, we would expect the land to be a lot more choppy because the noise is a lot smaller. So let's see what we get when we run it now. There, we're in exactly the same start position. As you can see, it looks quite different and it's a lot more bumpy. And here we've now got a big cavern on this side of us. We can jump down and you'll see there's a lot more going on. We can jump down here, a lot more going on in the terrain this time. And we've got quite a long way to jump back up now. There we are. So you can see it's a lot more choppy, there's a lot more lumps and bumps than we had before. So if we come out of that, now if we do the opposite, because we started with 100, so if we now do 200, we would expect to see a much smoother terrain. There, there's a lot less going on in the terrain now. Let's have a look. We've still got a cavern here, but not nearly as much interest in that. It's more just a sunken area, and the rest of it is quite smooth. So if we stop that, perhaps we'll go back to our default value of 100. If we look at the octaves, let's try putting that up. We'll make them quite exaggerated, see if we can see the differences. There, once again, our ground's a lot more choppy, but this time the noise is, we've left the noise at 100, but we've changed the octaves, so it's made it a lot more jagged, almost impossible to navigate round. So let's stop that one. And we can put that one back where it was. And let's have a look at changing just the persistence. We've got it on quite a high value here, so let's put it to quite a low value and see what the difference is. So with a low persistence, once again our terrain is quite smooth. We've still got our cavern here that we had, but there isn't much interest at all. It's literally just an oval around us now. So it smoothed everything out a lot with the persistence down. So let's come out of this and put that back to where it was. And we'll have a look at the lacunarity. Perhaps if we put that up a lot higher. Let's see what happens now. Now that's made it fantastically jagged, with all sorts of little spiky bits of terrain, almost impossible to navigate again. Full of caverns and tunnels. It's a job to even imagine where we're going. Oh, here we go. Oh no, we've fallen down again. So we'll stop that. And we'll set again that value back to where it was, 2, and then once again we'll go back in, and then we can remind ourselves what we started with. There, a much more manageable terrain. So all of those we started in exactly the same place. All we did was change the noise, and we made the terrain completely variable. So there's just so much you can do with this in terms of the look and feel that you want, whether you want to make it into an underwater world perhaps and have it far more jaggedy than we want when we're walking around with the character, or perhaps some sort of moonscape where you want it to be really quite flat in areas and just have a few craters, then you can do all of those just with altering these noise settings. So let's come out of that. Now, using the biome map height, you've got the option to use that or not use that. Now if we quickly just generate the biome map again, now this is created using a 2D height map and then a heat map and a moisture map, and then the results of which are all put together to create the various biomes depending on the heat and the moisture and the type of land you would get at each height. Now obviously the lowest areas are the water, up to the higher areas which are the ice peaks. So back in Terrain Manager, if you use a biome map height, then the height map texture, the value of the height map, will be used as a multiplier to each chunk, so as you move away from the water your terrain will gradually raise up till you get to the higher areas and then gradually come down to the water again. So if I was to untick that, you still have the water as the lowest, but you wouldn't get that movement up to the higher areas. It will stay a lot more flat. So we can see that by pressing play again and comparing what we've got now to what we had before. There, our terrain is a lot smoother and doesn't really raise up away from the water. It stays very much as it was. You still get the chunks and the caverns and the caves, but you don't get nearly as much interest as we had when we had the using biome at height option ticked. So let's stop that and we'll add it back in because I think it makes a far more interesting terrain. Now the other option down here is whether to include caves or not, and there's a couple of settings for caves. Now if I take caves out and we go back into our game, if you remember before, just to the right of us we had that big cavern that we were looking over and jumping into, but if we run it now we'll find that we haven't got all of the extra caverns. There, it's gone now, and we just run straight through onto the desert. So if we stop that, we can still get some caves appear if we put the octaves and the lacunarity up so they're high. Then we'll probably get quite a crazy world, even with the include caves setting unticked. So let's have a look and see what we get. There, you can still get very bumpy sort of terrain even without the caves, but you get far more interest if you add the caves in. So if we put the caves back in again and remind ourselves what we had, now just to the right of us here we have this cavern with the caves at each end. So if we stop that, if we were to alter the cave depth, let's make it deeper. That's how far down the floor of the cave is, so let's start that now and let's have a look down into that same cavern now and see what it looks like. run over here, and that's quite a bit deeper now. There's a lot more interest at the bottom. We've got extra layer of cave underneath that we didn't have before that we can get down to. So we've lowered the floor of the cave area, giving us almost a second layer of caves. So if we come out of that, we put the cave depth back to what it was before, and we shorten the burrow intensity down. Let's bring that down, say to 2. Then we can have a quick look at that and see how different our cavern looks now. There, it's almost taken the cavern away completely, but it's added some rather interesting floating rocks up here. So it's almost gone the opposite way and burrowed outwards rather than burrowing inwards. So let's stop that and put it back where it was. Now another interesting option is the reverse cave effect. So if we were to tick that, so everywhere where the cave burrows downwards and under the ground, it will do the opposite, almost like the burrow intensity, almost like that, where it pulled the ground out instead of burrowing in. So if we have a look now, instead of having the cavern in front of us, we'll have a big cliff in front of us instead. There. So what was underground, hollowed out, is now above ground, making all sorts of other interesting cliffs and overhangs. So if we put that back, and then we've got everything back exactly as it was when we first started, we can go back in and remind ourselves what it looked like at the beginning. There. Now here we are again with a much more manageable terrain and our caverns and caves. Now a lot of those terrains are really quite wacky and not what you want in a game, but it was an exercise in seeing how different we can make the terrain look simply by changing those sliders without even moving the character. They're all from exactly the same start position. That's it for this video. Check out the website for other MC Terrain videos.